Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with the latest installments.
The four of them sat in the meeting room as Mary dispensed tea and coffee. Baines was utterly drained. Douglas gave her a warm but appraising look. "Was it always your intention to sentence Lloyd the way you did, Jill? Throwing us the lifeline of manslaughter?" he asked. Baines placed her elbow on the table, supporting her head wearily with her right hand. "I'm sure it would be improper for me to answer that question, Captain," she answered with just a twinkle of usual humour. "Quite right," agreed Douglas. "I would have done whatever I had to do and expected no less from the jury," she added hoarsely. She relaxed a little. "But I have spent the last few days trying to find an answer, any answer, which might at least partially serve all ends and serve our future. 6 months was not nearly enough for the things he's done and caused to happen. But we're simply not in a position where we can incarcerate him for years. I just hope it's long enough to take the edge off the bloodlust and the hatred. We've lost enough. As long as Lloyd plays the part I hope he will, we may all just get through this incident without too many scars." "You did a remarkable job," admitted Patel. "Not just out there, but in here too. You shamed us, and you were right to do so." He looked to his co-counsellors. "It's a lesson we should never forget." "Luckily," said Douglas, stretching languidly as the tension ebbed from his body, "I've got a first officer who keeps me honest." They all smiled at that. "Your courage saved a man's life today, Jill," Sarah added. "The compromise you struck may have saved our society from tearing itself apart, before it even had chance to get started, too. Hopefully, we can all move forward now, without a stain on our consciences. Well done, Jill. Really, well done." "As long as Lloyd doesn't let me down," said Baines, a shadow of concern in her already dark eyes. "Do you know," Douglas remarked brightly, "I don't think he will. I'm taking a team out to Fossil Rock tomorrow in the hope of salvaging the wreckage of our equipment. I don't know if we'll find anything, but we have to try. I'll take Lloyd with us so that he can say his goodbyes. We're not risking the trip twice. I've decided to take the remains of Arnold back there too." A flicker of sadness crossed his face. "Captain Arnold Bessel and Lieutenant Audrey Jansen," he murmured. "They've been together so long, I can't bring myself to separate them now. It seems wrong." He turned to the priest. "Maybe you would come with us and say a few words, Sarah." "I'd be happy to, James. I haven't been outside the ship since we boarded at Canaveral. It would do me no harm to take in a little fresh air." "Giorgio wants to come as well," said Douglas. "Obviously, when I said yes, I didn't know that Lloyd would be coming with us. I'll have to warn him and see what he says. As we promised Lloyd, officially, that he can visit her grave, it would be a poor show to renege now. Apparently, Giorgio and Mario both knew Audrey too. I didn't realise until all this. It promises to be an interesting little trip," he concluded sardonically. They finished their drinks and turned in for the night, all spent, after an emotionally exhausting day, a day which, just possibly, had not turned out too badly in the end. The giant spaceship dominated the clearing, despite the only natural illumination coming from a quarter moon. Through the darkness, hundreds of windows twinkled with the light of controlled electricity, a force never before seen on this world. The eyes of the night watched the ship. One pair in particular studied the vessel, patiently waiting at the edge of the clearing. Intelligent eyes. Blue eyes. Their patience was rewarded presently, as a white light began flashing rhythmically, sending very deliberate, syncopated patterns out into the night. One creature alone in the entire outside world was able to decipher this complex message represented in light and understand its meaning. Dr. Heidi Schultz waited for the Morse code to cease before kneeling to ignite a small fire she had prepared earlier. She came to the same spot at the same time each night, but tonight was different. Tonight, there was a message. She couldn't risk sending a return in case it was spotted by the wrong people. Whether understood or not, it would advertise her presence. She waited for the fire to establish itself before pouring stolen disinfectant onto the flames. This action wasn't to douse them, but to add the boric acid the chemical contained to the tiny conflagration. The flames flared bright green as Schultz ran away through the forest, finding her way using infrared goggles also lifted from the ship's stores. Her message, a completely oblique will-o'-the-wisp to all but the one for whom it was intended, was received. She continued to run all the way around the new world, to the opposite side of the clearing from her little fire. The green tinge hadn't lasted long, the fire itself burning out some minutes later. She waited in the darkness. Once satisfied that no response would come from her enemies, she used the topography for cover where possible, making her way toward the ship. The new world had capsized slightly during the storm, and she was able to find a tuck underneath the port side. Now all she had to do was wait for the appointed hour. Morning brought the promise of a fresh, sunny day. Strapped into the passenger seats aboard the shuttle, a small team of 9 waited to depart for Fossil Rock. Dr. Natalie Pearson, Mother Sarah Fellows, and Giorgio Bacchini fidgeted impatiently. The red-haired Australian construction worker, whose name rather surprisingly but almost inevitably turned out to be Bluey, scanned listlessly through an inventory of missing items on his tablet. Jeff Lloyd sat subdued under the watchful and completely expressionless gazes of the Sarge and 3 other security personnel. Douglas and Singh ran final pre-flight checks on the shuttle's small bridge, bringing the total complement to 11. The birdwatchers were armed and ready, waiting for the bay doors to open. The mood was somber, and Singh resisted the urge to ask the captain to make the usual announcements. The launch cycle was significantly shorter in atmosphere. Without need to decompress the shuttle bay, the large doors opened directly, flooding the chamber with bright sunlight. Even so, Natalie continued to feel stifled by the doldrums radiating from the crew. She hoped their humour would lighten once they took flight, to see again the majesty of the world outside. The little ship left its berth slowly, gently turning towards their destination. Once the new world was safely behind them, the pilot opened up the engines and they accelerated rapidly away, but the atmosphere pervading the group stayed with them. However, a question had been niggling at Natalie for a little while, so she attempted to strike up a conversation, hoping to brighten the journey. "Bluey? Why do they call you Bluey?" "It's my name," the Australian replied unhelpfully, not looking up from his tablet. "Yes, I see that, but why not, I don't know, Red, perhaps?" The Australian looked completely blank. "Why would they want to call me that?" he asked, puzzled. Natalie felt her face warm and knew it had flushed as red as Bluey's mop of hair. Your hair?" she tried, squirming awkwardly. Bluey continued to stare blankly back at her. "Why would anybody want to call me Red?" he asked again. Feeling a little tongue-tied, Natalie fervently wished she had kept her mouth shut. This wasn't the trench she had expected to find herself in today. Unwilling to place further trust in words, she merely gave an embarrassed shrug. "Me brother's called Red. That would just confuse everybody," stated Bluey, ending all debate. Natalie's eyebrows shot up. "Of course. How silly of me," she acknowledged, reversing out of the conversation. Fortunately, she only had to endure the awkward silence for a few more moments. To her immense relief, they were soon hovering over Fossil Rock once more. The soldiers descended first, to secure the area. In the movies, this usually meant jumping out of some kind of vehicle draped with machine guns, spinning around and loudly declaring, "The area's secured!" Invariably, this happens mere moments before an attack is launched from around a corner, which turns out not to have been. Natalie hoped the real world would yield a little more attention to detail, whilst praying their security team wasn't salted with red shirts. Luckily, the Sarge was first on the ground. There could be no guarantees, but she had learned to trust him. In fact, lately she began to feel strangely drawn to the rugged, no-nonsense soldier. Perhaps it was because he had saved her life, perhaps more. She forced herself to focus on the sight below. The forest canopy had intruded much further into the clearing during their previous missions, making landing unnecessarily risky. However, the storm had flattened many of the trees surrounding the small glade, so many in fact that, once sure the coast was clear of predators, Lieutenant Singh confirmed that he could now land. The Sarge gave the thumbs up, and Singh brought the little ship down onto a soft bed of storm-smashed vegetation, for the very first time directly onto prehistoric soil. Bluey and Natalie set to work immediately, searching for their lost equipment. Memories of the hurricane were very much centre and forward in their minds, as they were for everyone returning to the locus in quo. Their terrifying brush with one of Mother Nature's most violent tantrums had certainly left its mark on the survivors, as it had on the ground. Even the indestructible Sarge still had an angry bruise on his cheek from a boot in the face received during their rescue. The feeling was unsettling, even for first-time visitors. Natalie stared balefully at the tree trunk she had held onto throughout the storm. In a very real sense, it had saved her life. The Sarge, keeping an eye on everyone, noticed her unease and stepped over, placing a comforting hand at her elbow. "Are you thinking we owe that tree?" he asked ruefully. "How did you guess?" "Oh, it crossed my mind." Natalie turned to him. "I never thanked you for saving my life either, did I? Twice, in fact." "I'm sorry. Thank you, Sarge." "Not necessary, Doctor. It was, and is, my job to protect you, all of you." "Yes, but when I lost my grip, you grabbed me for a second time, and in trying to save me, lost your own. If the wind hadn't dropped that instant, it would have killed you." Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes, and she wiped them away irritably. She didn't want this man to think her weak. The Sarge looked down at her, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "But it didn't," he said simply. "Thank you," she repeated. "And please, call me Natalie." "You're welcome, Natalie. Now, if it's all the same to you, I'd quite like to get what's left of this gear packed into the ship before we all get ate." Natalie smiled warmly at him. "I can do that," she said, returning to a task with a positive step. Fortunately, most of their tools and apparatus were packed into protective flight cases as soon as the severity of the storm had been realized, so there remained some hope. They just needed to find where the wind had deposited everything. There wasn't much hope for equipment carried over the craggy drop, cutting away the northern and western edges of the clearing. It would simply be too dangerous to climb down to the valley floor, away from the group, looking for lost boxes in the middle of a Cretaceous forest. However, on the top of the plateau, they soon began to discover finds, rather more modern finds than the ones previously sought at Fossil Rock. The tabletop holo projector was first to be found. It was damaged, but probably fixable. The all-in-one soil resistance and ground-penetrating radar machine was found between the splintered boughs of a tree, some 5 meters above the ground. With some very careful climbing and extrication, it was retrieved, miraculously unharmed. Other small items like shovels, picks, hammers, torches, etc. were also turning up within 10 or 20 meters of the dig site, many caught in the branches of trees descending the cliff. They saved everything they could reach safely, but had no preconceptions about reclaiming everything. From the debris dispersal patterns, they discerned how the shape of the valley, whipping the hurricane winds into a frenzy, had created eddies which flung wreckage and foliage in all directions. The revelation led them to begin searching the forest behind the dig too, contrary to the main direction of the wind, and sure enough, their efforts paid dividends. "I'm surprised we've recovered so much," said Douglas. Looks like we've been lucky, eh? Nah, mate. I can't find Blossom, Bluey commented moodily. Blossom? She's me favourite breaker. Only 8 kilograms, but with a 2,000 blow per minute 300 joule kick and a no-shock grip. I get a full day's work out of her batteries too. Yeah, she's a real beauty. The Australian heaved a massive sigh. I'm Devo. With that, he strode off to resume his quest to rescue Blossom. Have we been lucky? Asked the Sarge, overhearing the brief exchange. Douglas looked at him quizzically. We lost 5 rifles, sir. None have been found when so much other stuff has. I think there's been more than chance at work here, Captain. Douglas frowned. You think they've been picked up? There's only one person out here, the Sarge replied, looking up into the hills. But that's the one person I really wouldn't want to take possession, sir. How could she possibly have found this site? Asked Douglas sceptically. Jackson pointed up towards a shelf above them, on the side of a nearby mountain. That's where I'd camp if I were her. Somewhere up there, sir. Remember? When we caught that flash of reflected sunlight? From there, she could keep an eye on the New World, the planes, and any moves we might make. He shrugged. She was probably tracking us with her stolen binoculars from the moment the shuttle left base. It's what I'd do anyway. Douglas nodded. Let's hope the rifles turn up. I can't believe she survived out here all alone, he said, adding to himself, just when I thought things were going well. Keep your mouth shut, Douglas. She's just one more deadly predator, sir, the Sarge replied philosophically. If the others can eke out a living, then why not Dr. Schultz? She's certainly got the skills, and probably has more brain power than all of the other predators combined. Aye, you're right, Douglas admitted. It's just that when she left, I thought, well, I hoped it would all... Oh, damn it, he cursed, non-directionally. The Sarge nodded. He understood Douglas's frustration. We used to believe that nothing short of an asteroid could tumble the dominion of the dinosaurs. Now we'll see how much Turkish delight a handful of monkeys can bring down on their heads. I can't help feeling sorry for them, he finished sourly. Lloyd knelt in the trench, next to the last earthly remains of Lieutenant Audrey Jansen. She was as the dig team had left her, once they had cleared the scattered foliage and debris. Her skull still peeked out of the stone, revealing most of her face. He leaned down, running a finger around the eye and down the cheek, in the way that he had in life. Smiling sadly, he spoke, little more than a whisper for no one else to hear. I always knew you'd leave, but I didn't think you'd go this far to be rid of me, he said, letting out a shuddering breath. Goodbye, my love. He stood over the grave one last time, before stepping out of the trench. As Lloyd moved aside, Natalie moved in, respectfully replacing the bones of Captain Arnold Bessel. Satisfied they were laid out correctly, she jumped back out of the trench as Mother Sarah began to say a few words of closure and comfort for the long, long departed, but by the most bizarre quirk of fate, not forgotten, man and woman. Lloyd watched the process with dull detachment. Wiping a single tear from his cheek, he glanced up at young Giorgio Bacchini standing opposite him across the trench, and his eyes widened in horror. Baines was enjoying a little time out. Earlier that morning, she had spent a constructive hour with the chief engineer, discussing the planned underpinning operation beneath the ship and the repairs to the tear in her side. Assuming the current fair weather held, it would be several days before the soil dried sufficiently for groundworks. The storm and floodwaters had not yet fully subsided, but Hero was anxious to have everything in place ready. After all, they had been fortunate once, but if the ship continued to cant further, they might yet have real problems on their hands. Baines reran the engineer's proposal through her mind, sharing his concern after the way the hurricane had surprised them. 22nd century man is just not accustomed to being taken so completely unawares by the weather. And neither is 22nd century woman, apparently, she thought ruefully. At least the lorry had survived the storm. Had it been wrecked, she would never have heard the end of it. She made an effort to push her worries aside for a while. All was well at the moment, and she was at her leisure for the first time in a very long time. After making a pot of coffee and surrounding herself with snacks, she asked the computer to play a selection of pastoral classical music. Nothing too dynamic that might suddenly scare the pants off her if she nodded off. Yes, today is a good day, she thought, curling up with a real book borrowed from Lieutenant Singh. Sandy had a whole library of them, always talking about how much more relaxing the reading experience could be with paper, ink and binding. Baines had read very few physical books until this voyage. With all the choice in the world available at a voice command or the touch of a button, she hardly saw the point. However, back on the first day of their journey, which seemed so long ago now, she had taken him up on his long-standing offer. Apparently the book was a classic, and like so many classics, everyone knew of it, but hardly anyone had actually read it. She chuckled softly to herself. Only Sandeep could set off on a voyage to Mars and lend her a space opera to read to take her mind off things. She removed what was apparently called a bookmark, or a quitter strip, as Sandy referred to them, and sighed contentedly as she continued the saga. She had to admit, the book conferred a certain tactile pleasure that was winning her over, and the escapism of the story was also proving anaesthetic to her real-world concerns. There really was nothing quite like sitting in safety and comfort while reading about someone else's crappy day full of monsters, space disasters, and psychopaths. Chief Nasaki had the bridge, so operations were in safe hands should any issues arise at the dig site. Hiro had offered to take the shift, suggesting she take the rest of the day. It was a rare event to see the chief on bridge duty, but he had a lot of diagnostic work to run on the bridge computers and would be constantly flitting from one workstation to another. Baines was touched by his concern, although she suspected that he probably just wanted her out of the way whilst he was talking to his sekai. She smiled, stretched, and luxuriated on her sofa. Whatever the reason, she was just glad to find a little time for herself. Now, where was I? Yes. That's no moon, it's a space state. Ah! She exclaimed in frustration as her comm binged. Sighing deeply, she answered, Baines? I'm sorry, Commander. Hiro's voice called through the small speaker. I've just had a very energetic conversation with one of Dr. Miller's chemists, a Dr. Abid Hussain. Apparently, he's found some strange chemical traces on one of the lorries in the pod cargo hold. I told him the captain would be back before long, but he was insistent that this couldn't wait. Did he tell you any more than that? Asked Baines. No, but he was very agitated. When I offered to go myself, he pointed out that his findings were a matter of ship security. I informed him that I have the highest clearance, to which he replied that he would call me like a shot if the vending machine on his level broke down, but this was above my pay grade. Baines laughed. The cheeky sod. Well, I expect we'll have a lot of this type of thing now with a ship full of twitchy scientists, each more qualified than the last. It's not overly surprising after the captain's speech yesterday. Although, I think we should look into it, Commander. Would you like me to go down there anyway? I can lock the bridge. No, it's okay, said Baines, resigned. I'll go. In the pod cargo bay, you say? Yes, Commander. On my way.
Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments uploaded each week. Subscribe for more. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.